All right, one more video going into the weekend. So earlier this week, I did discuss what happened with the Swedish elections as well as with Brazil. Didn't go too much into detail about Brazil. May do some more about that next week. One nation that I don't really visit that much in terms of my coverage is Hungary. I think that there's other channels that do it much better than I could. I do read sometimes what's going on there. Um, to be honest with you, nothing against them. I don't think Hungary's place in Europe is really as significant as people make it out to be. They do have a pretty well put together culture, and their economy is working pretty well. It's just not that large of a country. So you know, given that I do cover Nicaragua, I guess that's not an excuse. But look, I think what's happening with the EU, I think that they're censuring Hungary, and they might impose sanctions on them due to their immigration policies and some of their expelling George Soros and some of the other pro globalism forces in the EU. I think that it is a very significant event, and I'll talk about it. But here, let's first listen to the words of Nigel Farage and also the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban.
For the EDFF, Mr. Farage.
Well, Mr. Orban, thank God there's at least one European leader prepared to stand up for his principles, his nation, his culture and his people in the face of such extreme bullying. Thank God you're there, is all I can say. And I'm sure for Hungarians of a certain age, today will have brought back many dark memories. You'll hear a show trial where a bunch of political nonentities get up and point the finger and scream, enjoying themselves with their afternoon hate. And the chief prosecutor, the commissar that comes from the unelected government, he has the audacity to lecture you on democracy. You don't know what you're talking about. The fact that you've got 50% of the vote in your country and that no one has ever voted for Timmermans or can't remove him seems to have passed him by.
How many times are you
he's also telling you you're not getting your judicial appointments right. You've got to change things. This the man who's one of the bosses of a European Commission that appoints Martin Selmayr driving a coach and horses through all the rules that exist here.
So I don't know if you guys enjoy it as much as I do, but when he gets up on his soapbox, he just lets loose like he's basically trampling over everybody in his way. That's what I like about Nigel Farage.
You're being told what is really happening here, Mr. Orban, is they're just updating the Brezhnev doctrine of limited sovereignty. There's no point pretending in this union you're independent. There's no point pretending you run your own country. And Article 7 is the new method of adopting that. They want to strip you of your voting rights. They want to stop giving you European funding. And all of it because you have the audacity to stand up to George Soros, the man who has poured $15 billion all over the world in trying to break down the nation states, to get rid of our traditional forms of democracy. And in Hungary, of course, he spent money to promote illegal immigration into your country, and you, quite rightly, have stood up to him and closed him down. I wish we all did the same. Mr. Orban, you keep saying you want to stay a member of this European Union, but it's not just your country that's been insulted today. You've been insulted today. Time to be more logical. Come and join the Brexit club. You'll love it.
The floor now goes to the Prime Minister of Hungary, Mr. Viktor Orban.
So essentially, he's trying to. Hungary is not yet committed to leaving the EU under Orban, but the day will probably come, and we don't know when, that people decide that there's no benefit any longer for staying in the EU. I think one of the reasons that less countries have decided to take the plunge yet is because corporate interests within those countries also happen to they've already greased the palms of the EU and they have something to gain from it. Eventually, I don't think they'll be able to ignore it either. You're just going to have a huge amount of ordinary citizens and small businesses, and eventually some of those corporations too. They'll figure out that the EU doesn't really serve any purpose beyond just ordering people around.
President, honourable members, I know that you have already made up your mind. I know that a majority will approve the report, and I know that my speech here today will not manage to change your opinion. Still, I have come here today because you are not going to condemn a government, but a country as well as a nation. You are going to denounce Hungary, that has been a member of the family of Christian European nations for 1,000 years. You're going to condemn Hungary, that contributed to the great history of Europe with hard work and shed its blood when needed. You're going to denounce Hungary, that rebelled and took to arms against the biggest army of the world, the Soviet army, and shed its blood for freedom and democracy, and when time came, opened its borders to fellow Eastern German friends. Hungary has fought its battles for freedom and democracy, and I stand here today and see those are the ones to accuse Hungary who inherited democracy, who did not have to take personal risks in order to obtain liberty. They are the ones who want to condemn the anti-communist democratic resistance in Hungary. Honourable members, I stand here in front of you and I defend my country because for Hungarians, liberty, democracy, independence and Europe are questions of honor. This is why I say that the report in front of you insults Hungary and insults...
So you get the point there, and I think at this point, by the way, this is on the Duran, which is a channel. I think they're kind of a little more of a pro-Russian news outlet, although I don't really care, so you can check out their channel. Some of their stuff's pretty cool. Other stuff is a bit kind of clownish, but I do like their channel. So what does this mean and why is this important? Okay, so increasingly, as we're going forward with what's happening with the EU and Brexit and also the migrant crisis in neighboring Germany, also some of the crises that are happening in Sweden, and even yesterday there was a big to do about. I think I was watching some leftists, Richard Wolff and Jamal Thomas, discussing the, they're saying, how could it be that people are, it's Sweden? I mean, why are people voting for these far right fascists or whatever? Well, it is the left. It is the left that encouraged mass migration into Europe, and they claim when people blame them for it, they say, well, why is it that the right wing started all of these wars in the Middle East? Well, that would be a fair point, and it is a fair point when you're talking about refugees from Afghanistan and Syria and some of these other countries. But not all of the refugees are from there. A lot of them are from all sorts of other countries. Algeria. That's not started by the West. Algeria has had a civil war. What about Tunisia? Not really started by the West. People from Morocco. The conflict there is not started by Western capitalist countries. There are problems in Morocco, and I think the West doesn't really help them. But they're really all they can do is deflect, because whether or not you believe that what's happening in these countries where the migrants are coming from is a Western responsibility, it still doesn't justify letting throngs of people in with no plan on how to absorb them. no concept of how to, ease the interaction between them and the native citizens. And then you get all these people saying, well, Europe's just is going to have to deal with it. Fuck the common man over in Europe. They're just going to have to deal. They're just going to have to grow up, and their kids are going to have to basically be strangers in their own country. Tough. That's their idea of justice on the left, and that's why people are rejecting it. And I don't give a shit if people call. I'm not endorsing either side in this. I probably, as you can tell, have zero sympathy on the left side. And as for these right-wing leaders, what am I supposed to do? I can't go to somebody from Hungary and tell them to vote for the interests of somebody in Ohio, okay, or the interests of somebody anywhere else. They have to vote for the interests of their own family and community. This is not the global society in those countries that the corporate masters as well as the left have both promoted for different purposes. One has hoped for a society that's classless, borderless, and with no private property, and the other one has hoped for a society that's borderless, so that they can just basically trample over people and make them buy their shitty products at lower prices. So that's about it for that issue. Now, I will say, who is the person most affected by what's going on here? Of course, Viktor Orban and Hungary are both affected deeply by it, because they're probably going to be censured and sanctioned eventually by the EU. But I'm looking at a longer game here. The world leader that is most in trouble because of what's going on is Emmanuel Macron. And in a related way, similar way, Angela Merkel, although with her, it doesn't matter what's going to go on with Hungary. She's already treading water. But why am I talking about Macron? Well, in 2017, Macron was heralded by the West, by I guess not the West as organic societies, but by the elite press, the media, and the top tier statesmen of the West. The Trudeau types, the Merkels. Macron was heralded as the person who would hold back the hordes of barbaric right-wing fascism when he ran against Marine Le Pen in the French election. And I think that he won the campaign, and he ran a good campaign, and he tried his darndest to defeat her. And I think you do owe him at least that he worked as hard as he could to win. And he did defeat her. And I think that it's logical. It's one of the reasons I didn't predict that election at all. I didn't try to predict it. If I would have been smart, I would have just predicted the smart money that the House wins, that Macron would have won. Because I don't think that France has it in its character, just like I don't think that Sweden has it in its character, to really assert its own fundamental sovereignty and say, no, we're not going to abide by this open borders, unlimited immigration policy. So they did elect Macron. And Macron, this was the scene, I think, when he was elected. So they were playing the EU anthem, not the French anthem, when he won the what's it called, the presidential election. Now, I will say this: Macron's entire legitimacy is built upon the idea that it's in the interest of Europe to stick together. And he has this bullshit thing where we're all about democracy and keep it, and we're going to reform the EU and make it more transparent. Bullshit. Bullshit. Macron can't do anything about it. Macron is basically as much of a puppet as anybody else in the EU is. And the fact is that he's not popular anymore in France. I think let me see. Macron approval rating. So I guess I didn't know that there's this French Watergate going on, but he's basically looked at as kind of this tremendous disappointment here because look, we all talk about in the United States the disappointment of Barack Obama winning the Nobel Prize. I think even before he even did anything, and from there on, everybody, the expectations were so high that anybody who was disappointed by Barack Obama had to be whipped back into line in order for them to maintain order in the Democratic Party. They basically had to say, hey, if you object to this, here's your Klan robe, you fucking redneck. That's the way they related to it here in the U.S. And eventually people just said, screw you, I'm going to say whatever the hell I want. And it's not like Obama's shit doesn't stink either. With Macron, it's not as bad as with Obama because he didn't win a Nobel Prize, but when he won that race in 2017, people were behaving as if the world had been saved, that a disaster had been averted, that if Le Pen had won the presidency of France, the country would have sunk into the sea out of pure hatred. But in reality, Macron's victory didn't change anything for France. It's still a corrupt whole. A lot of the reasons that the EU is such a catastrophe is because it emulates France and Germany in their in the worst way possible. There's good things about Germany, such as their emphasis on quality products and some of their cultural things. I don't really like France, so I'm not going to say anything positive about them. Nothing personal, guys, but I don't really care about France anyway. But the EU was created basically as this faceless bureaucracy that basically dictated things to people from the top, and it was just this authority that was, people were just forced to recognize it, similar to a lot of the French governments throughout history. You have to remember, France was the country of the French Revolution. There was Louis the 16th, with his just tone deaf relationship with the people, and before him, I think it was his dad or his uncle, Louis the 15th. I believe it was his dad. I don't know what the succession was there, but Louis the 15th said, "Après moi le déluge." I think is the phrase. After me, the flood, because he didn't care if France collapsed after him. So yeah, the monarchy over there was totally detached. Then comes the French Revolution. They went to the other extreme. They tried to create a totally, a rootless society, became just as detached as a monarchy, fell apart. Then you get Napoleon, who was, yes, he was a popular leader and he focused on conquering the world, failed at it. Ironically, Napoleon could be said to have been the most transparent French leader in history. then you keep going forward. You had all these French republics that have fallen apart due to the lack of cohesive, like a real belief system in France. I guess is the problem. That you have rural French who believe, I guess, in a traditional culture, and then you get the urban French who, I guess, live in some sort of bizarre existential hellhole, in their own minds. That's the problem with France, and they've applied it to their system of government. So at the top, you always have these bureaucrats and magistrates and basically an administrative state that doesn't really leave a lot of individual rights to people. I don't think that they have the freedom of the press in France. It's tolerated, but it's not like it's enshrined in law. It's to a certain extent worse than it is in England. Although I think in Britain the enforcement is worse. But yeah, France took all of those attitudes, their poor attitude towards running their country, and applied it to the early European Union, along with Germany. So you have the severity and efficiency of German oppression combined with the nonsense of the French mind. That's what the EU is. Of course, they put it in Brussels. So Belgium is kind of it's an amalgamation of all the craziness in Europe. It's like everything wrong with Europe meets in Belgium. I'm sure that the Belgian people are nice people on the individual level, although Belgium doesn't even have its own identity. It's like a country. It's one country with uh, three different identities. That's how ridiculous it is. So I think they even have like 7 parliaments, if I'm not mistaken. They have one parliament for Flanders, one parliament for Wallonia, which is the French-speaking part of Belgium. Then they have the national parliament. Then they have the French-speaking parliament. Then they have the Dutch-speaking parliament. So it's not enough that they have one for each region. They have to have one for each community, and then another one for the German-speaking community. So what the hell is that's the attitude of Europe. It just combines everything wrong with those 2.5 countries, Germany, France, and Belgium, and it's coming apart because people are realizing that these leaders are not leaders. Macron was basically elected to be sort of this chaperone for the European Union. It says a scandal involving the security guard of Emmanuel Macron has fast become the biggest crisis the president's short spell as leader. During a protest on May 1st, his 26-year-old security guard, Alexandra Benalla, was captured on video hitting a male protester and violently manhandling another woman. Benalla was wearing a police visor and helmet, but was only supposed to be observing the police in action. A few days after the incident, Macron suspended Benalla, but the security official was not sacked until July 20th, a few days after being identified by the newspaper Le Monde. So they want to. So in America, now granted this is CNBC, but this didn't really make the news here for most people. In America, Macron was sold to us as kind of this rejection of Trumpism in Europe, but this is what's going on under him. This is what they do. A political analyst at Sciences Po, Thomas Guinol, told CNBC Thursday that such a statement showed Macron is behaving like a child king, not a state. Well, what do you say? Macron has drawn criticism by remaining largely silent over the matter, but added fuel to the fire Tuesday by telling his own ministers at a closed-door event that his rivals could come and get me if they dare. It sounds kind of like a boss there. Macron is kind of a weirdo. He's also married, and I don't care if this sounds sexist. He's married to like a woman who is like, she has like one leg in the grave. I think she was his teacher back in like elementary school or something. This Benalla Gate is a French Watergate because it's just like the U.S. one. The problem is not the crime, but the cover-up. The French people saw lieutenants and ministers of Macron lie repeatedly, he said via email. In May 2017, Macron became the youngest ever president of France. The then 39-year-old won easily against the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen in a runoff by capturing more than 66% of the vote. So that's what's set to happen in Brazil later, next month, in my opinion. Although one can hope that Jair Bolsonaro will prevail if you believe in that type of politics. I happen to think he's the best option they have. Sorry for those of you that are butthurt about it, but the rest of them are idiots. So those of you that are a little confused, let me explain what's happening. Why am I even bringing up Macron when we started with Hungary? You see that there's this whole idiocy that Americans become obsessed with because Macron won the presidency of France and warded, and people think that France has this central role in Europe and that they can hold it together. That's bullshit. Nobody can hold Europe together at this point. There is no country that can hold Europe together because they all have that one weak link. And in this case, Hungary, I wouldn't say that they're the weak link, but they are basically saying our attitude is as completely opposite to France's as possible. So what the hell are we even doing dealing with this bullshit of listening to Soros and letting him spread his nonsense over here? We're just going to ban him. So then they write this ridiculous report claiming that he's undemocratic or whatever. And maybe they have a point with that. And if you really want to be legalistic about it, sure. I mean, it is a bit of a infringement on freedoms to deny George Soros the ability to own a university in Hungary and fuck with people. I guess that's an infringement on democracy. But there's worse infringements on democracy happening in liberal Europe, so-called liberal Europe. It's not liberal Europe anymore. It's just the administrative state of Europe. So you had of course the Catalonian referendum last year, where people were just beaten senseless because they went out and voted in an informal referendum. And then you have this going on in France. This is what represents the European Union today. These distant, and I guess you do see Trump in the background here. So these pictures of they had to put him there because he looks now that he's a villain, now that the luster is worn off of him, they want to associate Macron with Trump, even though originally he was the rejection of Donald Trump. And Orban is kind of a little more of a similar leader to Trump. They will never represent what's going on as it truly is. That some of these leaders, you can disagree with their politics. I don't know if I really know enough about Orban's politics to say that I can support it. There's probably a few things that I would oppose, but it's Hungary, so I don't really tend to go there. With all due respect, I could change my mind. I heard it actually is pretty nice there, but in any case, Orban is not really beating people in the street the way that Spain is, and the way France does literally all the time. France is a country that's basically a mess, and it's been a mess for a long time. There's always these strikes and these student protests and migrant riots and whatever. That's the country that people hold out as the example for Europe. I don't think people are going to buy it. I think people would rather have a country like Orban's Hungary, which it's not going to be the perfect country. It might not even be a desirable country for me or you to live in, but it's the desirable country for the Hungarians themselves to live in. And I think people will end up having to respect that because there's not going to be a choice. Eventually, these countries will leave the EU, and they'll simply say, we're going to deal with the rest of the world on our own terms. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment when it uploads, share the video. Also, subscribe to the second channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds, and I'll talk to you later. Have a great Friday and a great rest of your weekend.